Where's our lovely backdrop?
Sorry?
Our lovely backdrop.
Oh, I'm so not with it.
Okay,
One second. Let me just do that properly.
Let me help you.
Yeah. Just move that forward a bit.
Oh, it's behind you?
Yeah.
Oh, nice. The garage.
Yeah.
You got it over there?
Yeah. Okay. Should be fine. Okay.
All right. Do we have dedications?
So yeah, it's
You mind if I put one in there?
yeah. Go ahead, and it's also the sponsor of the class is Shimon Grant.
Okay. For Shalima, for
Brigitte,
but
Brigitte Simon, but Brigitte Félicie Bat Shimon.
I'm gonna need to read that.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. So I'm gonna put the video on.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. Hello, everybody. We want to dedicate this session of learning the Alshech HaKadosh on Bereshit. Do we have it's sponsored first of all
Shimon Grant
by Shimon Grant
for Shlema
for
Brigitte Félicie Bat Simon.
Brigitte Felice Bat Simon. Okay, and also we want to in the slip of our learning there should be for Shalema for Imi Marasi Miriam Bat Chanalea and for Brachan Hatzlacha in her procedure today. Okay, so we were in the middle of a piece. We had the introduction, the birthing of Cain and Hevel, and a description of their chosen vocations. So we were in the middle. We asked a whole bunch of questions. What the strange language of Chava's was when she proclaimed, after it already says that she bore Cain, which is strange itself. We ask why, right? It states matter-of-factly that he was a Cain, he was Cain, and then there's a statement recorded from Chava that she acquired a man with God, and we had to understand what that means. And then it describes also, almost as an afterthought, right? And she also birthed Hevel, and Hevel was a shepherd while Cain was a farmer. So the first approach was we talked about how Veha Adam. It's interesting because when it talks about Adam and Chava being intimate, when she conceives the children, it calls him Veha Adam as opposed to Adam, the singular individual. It's Veha Adam almost as the species, and we talked about how the pasuk is affording a vav hey in Adam, just like Chava retains a vav hey. So they are no longer a full projection of Yud Kei Vav Kei. After the sin, they're only vav hey, and therefore Chava is very excited that even though they are just on the level of vav hey, she bore both Cain and his twin, which was an ish v'isha, which has the Yud Hey, and right together the Yud Hey. So she's very excited. Humanity has the Yud Hey again. So we talked about that approach, and then we started a second approach, and that is also going with the idea that we started. I'm going to start again from that paragraph. How Adam was concerned that there was a cosmic pirud, a cosmic gap. Meaning not just that, meaning in the first approach we talked about how they themselves as humanity, Adam and Chava together, no longer retain the full set of Yud Kei Vav Kei. But here we're going to say in a deeper level that Adam was concerned after the sin that he actually made a pirud between the cosmic Yud Hey and Vav Hey. Okay, and we're going to pick up from there on the bottom, the last paragraph on Nun Vav on 56. O Yomar, alternatively, Veha Adam Yada et Chava Ishto, and the man knew Chava his wife, Kihine ba'avon Adam ve'ishto, with the sin of man and his spouse, Chashasha, he was concerned, or he suspected, Shema asu perud ben Yud Hey levav Hey shel Shem. Right, we talked about, last time we read this, we talked about how Amalek causes a gap that God says at the end of Parashat Bishalach, at the initial engagement with Amalek, Ki yad al keska, that God says only Yud Kei can be manifest without a full Vav Hey cannot be manifest fully as long as Amalek is in the world, right? And this is really Purim Torah. It's really important Maybe when we learn the Pachad Yitzchak, this will come up. But over there, so there is a gap between Yud K and Vav K, and we talked about how the Machzor Vitri, the student of Rashi, says that's the Kavanah. When you say Yehei Shmei Rabba, Shmei is Shem Yud Hey. That the name of Yud Hey should be complete, meaning we yearn and pine for a full expression of God in the world that includes the Vav Hey, and that is with the hopes, with in mind the ultimate destruction of Amalek. While we're on it, just a shout out from Tzfat, because we're in the Alshech HaKadosh's shul. So if you look in that pasuk, Ki Yad al Keska, God put his hand on al Kes, Chaf Samach, which means his chair, usually a kisei, Ka, that Ka, right? That God swears, Rashi says, that by his kisei. And if you look over there, the Vav He is missing from it says Ka, Yud He, so the Vav He is missing, and the Aleph is missing from kisei, which are the letters Aleph, Vav, He. So the Mekubalim say, the Pasuk says, Ki Bachar Hashem B'Tzion, God chose Zion as his place of ultimate residence. Right? Ki Bachar Hashem B'Tzion, God chose Tzion. Tzion is the description of the neshama of Yerushalayim. That means what Yerushalayim Shalmata and the astral Yerushalayim Shalmala are aligned, and there's the Shekhinah present in Yerushalayim. That's called Tzion. So, Ki Bachar Hashem B'Tzion, God chose Tzion. Iva, he desired Aleph Vav He Limoshavlo, to settle in it. So the verse says he chose Zion and he desired to settle in it. And Mekubalim say the first part of the pasuk is he chose Zion. That's when he resides in Zion. But Ki Iva Limoshavlo, when he desires, he yearns, that's in a state where he's not in Yerushalayim. When Tzion is not manifest. So Iva, Aleph Vav He are the letters Aleph from the Kisei and Vav He from the Ka. And the Mekubalim say Iva in Atbash, which is a system where you replace the letters of the Aleph Beis with, you replace the Aleph with the Taf and the Bet with the Shin. It works backwards. Iva becomes Tzfat. And the Mekubalim say that Kol Zman, that the Shekhinah is in Galut and there's not a full manifestation of God, this Aleph Vav He, where do they hang out? Where's the ultimate Ir Miklat that the Shekhinah, who's the ultimate refugee, hangs out in? Tzfat. Tzfat is the hidden Iva, which means desire. Meaning when it's not reality, when God's it's still in potential, God desires it. Iva, that is a reference to the Aleph from the Kisei and the Vav and the He. That's those three letters that are missing in Ki Yad al Keska. Okay, some Purim Torah, some Tzfat Torah. Okay, so Adam Rishon was concerned that there was a period between the Vav He, the Yud He, and the Vav He. V'chein efsher she'al kein amar hu yitbarach Ki Yad al Keska. That's right where the Alshech HaKadosh is referencing the pasuk that we just mentioned as a reference for a description of this period. Ki lo yachsirem hu yitbarach li'itchaber. God will not return them to cleave to each other, the Yud He and the Vav He, ad yinakem Amalek, until he is avenged from Amalek. Shehu mitzad hanachash hahu kenoda, because the Amalek is the ultimate expression of the Nachash's power in this world through humanity. V'zeh yomar, and that is what the verse is referring to when it says Veha Adam. We noted how strange that usage was. It should have said Ve'adam, and instead it said Veha Adam, the species. So why does the pasuk bend over backwards over there and describe the individual as Veha Adam? Kilomar, that is to reference the Vav and the He, B'li chibur otiot Yud He. Like we said in the first pshat. Hayu ba'avur ha'adam kasher yada et Chava ishto. So when Adam knew his wife, right, Chava, they were only on the level of Vav He and not with including Yud He. Ubir ota, and when he noticed, he saw that the pasuk describes ki vatar vateled. It says right away, it says, and she conceived and she bore. And we can infer from there that bitkifut, that it was very, very fast. It was techef umiyad. It was immediately one followed the other. Bli zman ibor, without any time for pregnancy. Ubli chavle yoleda, and without any process that included pain of childbirth. Kimosha Amruzal, like Chazal said, ma ha'herayon bli tzar, just like the conception was without pain, kach haleda, so too the birthing was without pain. So we infer this from how the verse juxtaposes, how it states vatar vateled, bam bam bam, matter of factly, that it was just immediate, right? Az Amra, then she said, Hine lo nitkayem banu inyan harbe arbe etzonech vehironech. That curse that God gave to the woman, that she will have increased pain in childbirth, that did not come to being, that did not happen during this birth, and therefore it gave them hope that perhaps they tasted something from before the sin. Ve'ein ze ki im sheHashem kibel teshuvatenu. It must be because God accepted their tshuva.
Wait a minute. So she has the children, and immediately, and there's no pain.
And an observation of that process.
This is against the warning that there is going to be pain.
There was no curse. The curse didn't happen.
So therefore,
it must be we're good.
They were
and they had hope.
Tikkun.
Exactly. And that's what she's saying when she says that she acquired man with God. We noted when we discussed how God had opened their eyes to see their sin afterwards, that there was this on some level there was a minimal tshuva, right? And so our sages also say shepatach lo petach shel tshuva, that God had opened an opening of repentance for him. If so, observing how they had gone through this birth without the curse, right? She says, Shekaniti ish, that I acquired man, shebli etzev, yalati kekoni ish, without any sort of pain. I bore as if I bought him, as if I just acquired him. He's just here, he's mine. Yore ki ani im Hashem. That shows et Hashem, right? Ki kaniti ish et Hashem. Et over here, Hashem means with God. That shows the fact that I bore him without any problem shows that I'm with God. V'zeu et Hashem shalem. I am with God. Yud ke vav ke. Sheshav v'nitztaref im vav he shebishmi. That he returned and joined my vav he that's in my name. So she was under the impression. Now, if this isn't true, then why did they not experience the curse?
So
either way, either she's right, and they should be.
There's another question, and that is that she's referring to Kaniti acquired ish to Kain.
Why? No, Kaniti means I acquired ish. I acquired a man, meaning now I have the next generation of humanity. I have a child. Et Hashem out in a state of being with God.
Yeah, no, I understand. But isn't that not referring to the birth of Cain, not
Indeed.
the birth of Havel?
Well, that's meaning it was the first birth. Meaning it was the first one, right? Meaning on the heels of the first experience. Okay, so we have, but there's a question here, and that is, was she right?
Was she right? Well, no, because every birth after that, there was a curse.
And also, they were not back in Eden. There's no way she was right.
They weren't back in Eden.
So, one second. If she's right, then why didn't they live happily ever after? And if she's not right, why did God give them this experience? Then it seemed like the curse didn't apply.
Right.
Which one is it? I mean, because of a fluke. She totally misunderstood it. Why did God do that? Or she's right. So then, what's the rest of the story?
Unless one would think that after childbirth of pain, you swear to you're never going to have another child again, and so maybe this was a way of Hashem to ease humanity into the birth process.
Right. Okay. Interesting. God has his plans.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know. It's a question that begs, according to this chart, it begs to be asked, and we'll see if it's addressed. Okay. I don't believe it's not in this piece. Okay. Because we go back and forth, you'll see that there's a whole bunch of at the end. There's very slight variations, but different ways of understanding the pasuk, and I don't think any of them address this particular issue that we just asked. Okay. O Yomar. Alternatively, Kaniti ish achar ha'avoti. I acquired a man after I was perverted, after I strayed. Inze ki'im im Hashem. This can only be through the rachamim of Hashem. Meaning, whereas the previous pshat was, wow, everything must be okay. I am with Hashem. I'm full set of Yud Ke Vav Ke because I'm experiencing something from before the curse. This is, even though I'm in a fallen state, God over here was with me meaning Yud Kei Vav Kei is Shem Rachamim, Hu Rachamim, meaning God was merciful despite my fallen state. It's totally different pshat. Hayah Hadavar, it was only through God being merciful, which is in this pshat we're understanding Yud Kei Vav Kei not to mean a full set of the letters of Hashem's name, but rather a particular reference to the attribute of mercy. V'lo b'shem Elokim, in contrast to the name Elokim, like unusually for the last big stretch of Chumash, Hashem has been identified in the Psukim as Hashem Elokim, Havaya Elokim. And here it's Havaya without Elokim. So according to that, we're saying this is Havaya, mercy, as opposed to Elokim, meaning din.
Right.
Okay? V'lo b'shem Elokim mishutaf, and not together partnered with the name of Elokim, ka'asher bihi barei Adam v'ishto, meaning when the Pasuk tells us about God creating Adam and Chava, it's Havaya Elokim. And now, in the next generation of humanity, it's just Havaya, meaning it's through mercy. But by Adam ve'ishto shahaya Havaya Elokim. Over there, the verse describes him as Hashem Elokim. Okay, another pshat. Alternatively, O Yomar, b'ma she'achati et ish, kaniti ish. With that which I fed my man, I acquired my man. Because why did she feed Adam? So that he shouldn't marry someone else.
Right.
So here she says, that which I fed him, I was able to acquire a man. Meaning it's only because I fed Adam that now I can have a baby with him, or rather a human with him. There was no babies, right? She'im lokein haya poresh mimeni v'noiseh acheret. If it was not for me feeding him, he would have left me and married another. V'lo haya li ben, and I would not have a child. Yera'eh, it shows shalom ma'as Hashem bi, God did not disdain me. He did not forsake me. He was not totally disgusted by me. Ki im sha'ani im Hashem. It must be that I am with Hashem, despite having fed him. Meaning God allowed my plan to come into being. V'zehu et Hashem. And that's the reference here with God.
I see.
Meaning she didn't learn it. Meaning, God, I guess, yeah, he is merciful to all of humanity and it lets us progress. But it's not any sort of reward it's not her scheme coming into fruition. Okay. Vihine. Okay, so now let's move on a little bit to we raised the questions about the description of Cain having a quote by Chava and Hevel not. And we want to discuss their natures now. Vihine shnei banea elu hayu. These, both of them were her sons. Ze mityaches el aviyut zuhama v'chomer. One, meaning Cain, this particular one, particularly relates to the coarseness and the toxicity, meaning of the snake, the chomer, and materiality, meaning the lower parts of the fallen state of man who is imprisoned by his material nature. Ve'al Cain me'alav hu Cain, and therefore naturally, automatically by himself, because of his very nature, his ingredients, he is Cain. What do we mean by that?
What does it mean, me'alav?
By itself, through itself. Me'elav. You'll see the word used when it describes the ruach, the kol of God being metalech in the God. He talks a lot about how it was by automatically. It says me'elav. I think in modern Hebrew you say that too, that it does it by itself. It seems to do it by itself. Okay, so he was already Cain. What do we mean by that? Kihu davar kinyani mamashi. That is a reference to the acquisition or the acquiring of something physical. Okay, so somehow he is, so now in Chava's fallen state, she births a human being who is devoid of the noble higher qualities of man. And he's just the chomer, which by itself seems to have a negative nature. Ach Hevel, in contrast to Hevel, whose name literally means vapor, or ether. Even though ether is an imaginary concept, it's a much better description than vapor. It's like something that has nothing. It's the slightest presence of something physical that seems not to be there. And that's his name. Why? Ach Hevel, hu haya mityaches al nefesh. Because he is totally related, his being is related to the soul. Hevel piv yitbarach, the Hevel, the ether of the mouth of God. When he breathed into Adam the soul, vayibach ba'apav, so that's the reference to Hevel here. Asher napach ba'apav nefesh ka'adam, that God is described as having breathed from his nostrils into man a soul. So that breath is Hevel's name, and he's a reference to the soul. V'zeu inyan Hevel, and this is Hevel's whole theme. Nigzar me Hevel peh, that his being was decreed through the breath of the mouth. And this is what the verse, and therefore the verse says, V'zeu et Kayin, et achiv et Hevel. Ki'ilu kol echad shmo imo. It describes them as having a name independent of, their name is not being caused by somebody else's relation to them, relating to them and calling them something. It is their identity, it's a description of their essence. Okay, so I just want to pause here and invite us to take an aerial view a little bit, step back and look at the symbolism here. That in the fallen state, the first generation that's produced is a bifurcation of the two elements, the two essential elements that make up man. So that one is embodied by the nature of the body itself, the physicality, and the other is completely the soul. And look how ineffective and tragic both their ends are. That, like, if you see, you can now, in understanding that theme, draw each the path of each one to its natural conclusion by itself, and basically they don't really have any sort of sustainability or viability.
But why would God have done that? I mean,
No, it wasn't that God did anything. This is the natural, meaning this is a description of reality. Meaning this is another way for our appreciate.
They naturally veer to the extremes.
We're going to that. Well, that's, first of all, that's the whole point of what we're saying. What their name was. It's not that was it. That's their name. But that was that. It's a description of what they are. The question is, you're saying, but why? Why should it be like this?
Yeah,
why should they come out like this?
You would have thought that Adam and Chava, who were parts of both the physical and the spiritual, would produce offspring who were also parts of the physical and spiritual.
So we're going to describe a little bit about how this happened, but remember this point is another necessary description of the implications of the fallen state. Meaning it wasn't just what happened there and their personal state, but the story goes on. This is all because of, this is the level of bifurcation of Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, and the loss of the Yud-Kei from the Adam and Ishto results in a generation of bifurcation between soul and body.
I see.
So that their very being is expressions of the isolated ingredients, and therefore, and it's an interesting study, because look at what somebody who's overcome just with the body does, which I would say is 99% of humanity throughout the ages. A human being never even engaged in trying to acquire a nobler self, but we're just prisoners to this, the coarse element of them, which is naturally by itself evil. And Hevel is completely impotent to be able to do anything. You'll see that he has a good nature, but ultimately he's Hevel. That's his legacy. And ultimately, both of them have a tikkun in Yitro and Moshe, as we'll note at the end.
Yeah.
Okay? So this is a very interesting beginning of a description. I mean, a discussion that obviously we have a whole story that's going to be where you have to discuss both their sacrifices their offerings that they bring, and the drama between them. So, and then ultimately Cain's comeuppance. So there's a lot of time and room to explore this, but the initial idea here is that they are born out of the very nature of humanity at this moment. Okay.
The fallen state of humanity.
Yes, and we'll get into it for a moment with the next couple lines. Why, if we want to say that they both had such distinct natures, why specifically did Cain come out first? Why did the fallen state of the materiality of man come out first? Because first, Chava's being spit out the toxin and then produced the ikar, meaning Hevel. So there's some sort of birur here. There's some sort of filtering where Cain is a result of the toxins of the snake that live inside of her. And this is a huge theme in the tradition in Chazal and Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer and Kabbalah. We associate the fallen state, we call the fallen state, so to speak, the infection, the zuama. And the zuama means the poison, as if we have the toxins of a snake inside of us, not from a bite, but rather because the Nachash successfully took advantage of Chava and impregnated her, so to speak, with a toxin, and that toxin is part of man's fallen makeup.
Mhm.
Okay, so first Cain, who's just the fallen, the bad apple, so to speak, he comes out first. She spits him out. Palta hazuama, she ejects the poison, and afterwards she can produce the choicest, the hevel, what hevel represented. And that's why there is no statement that accompanies the introduction of hevel. There's no need to say anything. Kasher b'kayin, as she explains or as she expresses by kayin, because now we can understand that her statement in the context of after Cain comes out and he's kind of like the refuse that needs to be ejected, then she says, now I can acquire a man with God, meaning hevel.
Oh, so the acquiring is
Meaning she's making a statement now that she's ejected the toxicity, and now she can produce a child, which is meaning the next child.
Uh-huh.
Okay, the alkain, and therefore vayhi hevel roatzon, and that's why the pasuk it tells us that's why he was a shepherd. Ki hayahu gidro l'malam yabale chayim. A shepherd is one that oversees livestock, and it's a testament to Hevel's state, which was above that of the animals. Roa alehem, he was a shepherd upon them. However,
I thought that we agreed that after the sin, that Adam generally would not rule over, will not be above the animals.
That's right. He would
So
not.
how did Hevel get that?
Okay,
status?
so 1 second. We know that there are shepherds.
Mhm.
So ask the same question about any shepherd. If Adam can't have any sort of rulership over the animals, then how is it that we've engaged in animal husbandry?
Right.
So obviously, first of all, what we're talking about by Adam is not animal husbandry. Animal husbandry is domesticating animals and working with some sort of relationship with them to cultivate them, but you're still at the mercy of their nature, right? Whereas by Adam, there was no need to fear any sort of food chain and any wild animals, and he could assert, meaning he had a vision, he had a visage of Yud Kei Vav Kei that he projected on animals, that they were in fear of him, and they would just do his bidding. So, meaning even Noach was commanded to collect all the animals, God had to send them to him. Okay, but your question begs to understand what we would have intended for Adam initially, as opposed to, in contrast to the animal husbandry that human civilization is engaged in. It's an interesting question, but certainly we know that it doesn't preclude shepherdry. So here, but indeed, your question deeper, you're saying, how could Hevel be on a level above animals in some way if we're in a fallen state? And we're saying that he is the soul who actually had, meaning that what the soul is higher than animals. So his nature was that he was a human soul, the ability to connect to God that animals can't, and therefore he was sensitive to issues of the soul. Why is it, just parenthetically here, we'll pause. I feel a better way to address this point is to note how we always make a big deal out of saying that the greatest leaders in our in throughout the generations of Am Yisrael were shepherds. We make a big deal of even calling the 7 shepherds that we see, like the metaphor Moshe Rabbeinu, the greatest shepherd, our shepherd was a shepherd, etc., etc. The idea of shepherding is that, Reuven and Gad it says that they had a lot of livestock, and that's why they chose to be Me'ever Li'ardeh.
That's right.
So after we it turns out that Reuven and Gad were from the greatest Baalei Musar of Am Yisrael, and that's the reason why they engaged in shepherding, just like the Jews were known as shepherding, and Yosef knew that it was actually offensive to Paro, and that's why he advised them to tell Paro that that's what they do. But what's this whole thing about shepherding? Shepherding is the idea that somebody who is working on oneself and is trying to tame the animal in him, to aspire to rectify Adam Rishon so that you can go back into the Gan. He is somebody who deals with the needs of Balei Chayim. And he masters the disciplining and the caring for of the Balei Chai so that he is a master of the Chai in himself and that he can overcome that. Whereas that was the Hevel understood that if Adam Rishon is being kicked out of the Gan, that means that you cannot ignore the curse. The point is not to be stubborn and engage in that from a fallen state to engage in the cultivation of the earth anyway. There needs to be a personal tikkun first. And therefore, whereas Cain insisted on being resentful and ignoring the curse and being frustrated, as we'll see, when we talk about the sacrifices, we'll see. Hevel understood that the only way for man to get back into Gan Eden is for the soul to assert dominion and engage in a relationship with the body that he can domesticate it. Okay? Okay, Ki hayahu gidro lemala mi'abalei chayim, because his own level of being was above that of the animals, roe alehem, and therefore he was a shepherd upon them. Ach Kayin, however, Kayin lo hayta ma'alato rak al hadomen. What was he superior to? The minerals. And therefore, the oved adama. You know, it's interesting because by Hevel over here, we're saying that because he was above the class of animals, he could shepherd over them. Whereas the engagement of earth is not being, with the engagement in the vegetation is not being above them, but equal to them. Because here the Alshech says that he was above mineral, not above vegetable. It's interesting, right? You can engage in the cultivation of vegetation by being not necessarily spiritually. How does that? Am I making too much of a precise inference here? It's interesting because he says Gidro lemala. His level was above the Balei Chai, because the role of a shepherd is to be above, to assert above, right, the flock. However, Cain here, his ma'alato was just on the domain, meaning his body is made out of physical matter, and somehow he has some sort of rudimentary nefesh that he has locomotion, he has will, right? He can command his body to go about, but he seems to be content engaging on the level of the I understand now. The oved adama lahotziat tzamech. Since his superiority is over the mineral, he has dominion over the earth to sprout, to bring forth the vegetation. So it's not an engagement in the vegetation itself, but it's engagement in the earth. He can master the earth. He can plow. He can sow, right? He can build. He can whatever that is necessary in order to spring forth. His level of creativity, what he can facilitate and bring into the world, is the tzomech. But that's it. Ach lo ala al haba'alei chayim. He was not elevated above the living creatures. And that is what the masters of true wisdom, the Kabbalists say. He was from the side of impurity, the side of tum'ah. Vehevel misitra didachuta, and Hevel was from the side of purification. Okay. And through an understanding like this, it is plausible to go another route, to understand when the verse says, Kaniti ish et Hashem, that Chava says, and now, right, we can understand that when Chava says, I have acquired a man with Yudke Vavke, what does she mean? Vehu ki halo ayidei zuama shehut laba nimtzu ba eruv zuama b'kedusha kilo nitrokna hakdusha mehem legamre. So she says that through this toxicity, this toxin of the snake that was within her, there was a mixture of impure and holiness, because she had not been purified yet totally. And uvechein lo haya makom latzek mimena ben tzadik ki im kol ben mitzoraf im zuhama. And therefore, it was impossible for her to produce a child that was completely tahor without also producing a child that, like a vehicle to be able to take the impurity. So she had forces of impurity and purity within her, both the potential for kedusha and the toxicity of the snake, and there needed to be a birur, some sort of separation, and therefore we afforded her a child to manifest the zuhama so that she could have a child that was pure. Okay, a little bit of an explanation to what you were asking. Okay, this is a Kabbalistic process which is talked about on many, many levels of reality. That's indeed, on some level, the whole idea of human history.
Yes,
And ultimately,
repeated in Abraham and Sarah,
which you will mention, yes. And ultimately, you can look at all of the human lineage as some sort of divine purification, genetic programming to produce the ultimate human, which is Adam Rishon. Again, that's David HaMelech.
and as always, the second one is the purified version.
Right, the ultimate, right. So, yeah. Okay, so there was no way for her to produce, for her to issue a child that was completely righteous. Ki im ko ben mitzuraf im zuhama. Rather, so it's interesting here, meaning even Hevel was not the total picture, because, like you were saying, because this is this has to become a process now that includes the avot. V'hine katavnu be'Avraham. Later, with the introduction of Avram Avinu, the Alshech HaKadosh has written, Shekedei sheyetze Yitzchak zach, in order that Yitzchak, Avram's son, can come out pure, hu tzarach lakachat et Hagar, he needed to take Hagar as a wife, lahatil ba mechelik sheba mizoamat nachash ayedei heyoto adayin arel, to remove from him the toxin of the snake, right? Because he was still not circumcised. That represents the state of him that he still had an impurity that he needed to refine or be refined from. And it's fascinating because Chava did not, Chava was the only woman. But with Avraham, in order to have issue that was not worthy, he took on another woman so that Sarah would be reserved only for the righteous child.
Yeah.
And there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. No matter how you side with the machlokas in the Talmud Bavli of whether Yishmael did tshuva or not, we know that we know what he comes from. Okay, that being uncircumcised, having a foreskin, means the furthering of this toxicity of the snake.
Bechina is
It means aspect.
right.
Sheha'arla, that the foreskin moshechet, it continues habchina, that aspect of the toxicity. V'yatza Yitzchak achar hamila misar, and immediately afterwards, after the milah, right, 3 angels show up, and Avraham Avinu gets the news that he's going to have Yitzchak now with Sarah, which is why Sarah laughed, because she said, now we're going to have a kid right after Avram gets circumcised. I wasn't holding up the works. God had to do a miracle for me to bring me back to the physiological state of a young woman, because I had to wait. I had to wait all this time while Avraham Avinu wasn't ready for a bris milah. So once Avraham Avinu gets a circumcision, and then he gets upgraded, he gets an Avraham, and Sarai gets a Sarah, and then they have a Yitzchak mibchinat hakdusha. And therefore, so when it comes time for Yitzchak's stuck, because he's back like Adam. He only has one wife. He's got Rivka, and there needs to be also separation between the forces that become Esav Harasha and the forces that become Yaakov Hatzadik, right? So what happens? So Shelohaya Yitzchak was not available for him the option. He couldn't take another woman to remove from him the aspect of impurity. Therefore, Rivka instead, she went for the 2-for-1 approach, and she had twins. And therefore, they should separate. And it's exactly right. That's a way for understanding what happened here. But you know what's interesting? It says, we said before, that Et Kayin means Kayin and his twin sister.
That's right.
And Hevel also had a twin sister. So, in those days, the shadchanut was minimal, and everybody was born with a
Mate.
mate. So now the mate intended for Yaakov was Rachel, and the mate intended for Esav was Leah. And yet,
Yes.
even though Esav was the Zuama, Leah was a tzaddiket who was fitting to be mitztarev with Yaakov
Mm.
and have shifteka. It's
Mhm.
interesting note over there. I don't know if that says something only specifically about Leah or about women in general, that it doesn't matter who they're intended for, that they can always be midavek with the tzaddik and produce purity. I don't know, but I'm pointing that out.
Interesting.
Okay. Okay. So one of those children of Rivka, Echad Yaakov, right? One aspect being Yaakov, and one aspect being Ve'echad Esav. V'navo el ha'inyan. And let's get to the point. Vehu, and that is Kihine Chava hayta yodat me'od. Chava knew very well. V'ra'ata et Kayin. She saw Kayin. She looked into that beautiful baby's face, and she knew. V'hikira ki hayami b'chinat hazuama. He was the face that only a mother could love. V'lo me'orav im hab'china acheret, not mixed with anything else, just 100% unfiltered, pure. Zuhama. And Azamra, and then she said, Ein zeh ki im sha'al yedei ma sheshavti b'tshuva. What a gift this can only be because I returned with a complete repentance. Kamdubar ba'pasuk, like we have mentioned, like we described in the pasuk Vatipakachna ineshnean, that both their eyes were opened. Kaniti ish et Hashem. So this is a very similar approach. Meaning, before we said that this was what she realized when there was no curse, when we compared her conception to her birth. Now we're saying that was actually we're describing that why Cain's nature was such and Hevel's nature was such, and we're saying we're going back and saying that's what she recognized. She looked and she said, God has afforded me a complete filtering, and that means that God's involved in this process of filtering and returning mankind to a state without toxicity. And she saw, demon baby number one is a complete embodiment of toxicity, and therefore God is fixing us up. It's only because I did tshuva. That God separated these two aspects, each one with one child, that it shouldn't be embodied in one child, one being who would be a prisoner to this mixture that ultimately would be his downfall. Meaning, as long as humanity has one representative who's totally pure, there's hope, right?
But it takes a very elevated consciousness to see the Zohama child
Yes.
and say, God is answering our prayer.
Well, she's effective. She's right, because if you think about it, the only cases that we described here where there was a filtration were by completely righteous individuals. I mean, how many times, did this happen in history that we know of? By the Avot, when God is producing an Am Yisrael, and by Adam and Chava, when God needs to produce an Am Yisrael.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
V'im kain, kaniti ish sheyeh im Hashem bli zuama. Meaning, once again, this is an introduction. This statement is not an explanation of Kayin, but rather an introduction to Hevel. That now that God has produced a child that is completely an embodiment of Zuama, I can produce a true child with Yud Kei Vav Kei.
Again, it takes tremendous bitachon to assume that the second child will be pure. What stops the second child being another copy of the first?
Because there was no, it'll keep on happening till it's out. But since there was no Kedusha in the first child, that means she knew that she had Kedusha in her also.
Yeah.
What, she's only going to produce children that are bad? No. So if she just produced a child that's completely bad, she knows that there's a separation. She's going to produce a child that's completely good. Okay? You have to understand also, like, if we zoom out a little bit from the drama, this is a statement to the state of Adam and Chava as individuals after the sin, their entire life. I mean, they were incredibly elevated. They didn't fall and get preoccupied with. They didn't become feral creatures. They had great aspirations for the rectification of the world and humanity, and a desire only from Kedusha to get back. They were involved in tshuva in so many ways, and they were involved with these issues and thinking about what's going to be and what's going to be with humanity. This is really this story of theirs, because I don't think really, they only appear again in another pasuk that talks about Shet, and then it talks about Adam a little bit, how long he lived. But this is their legacy. These concerns that the Alshech is giving dialogue to. So שחילק השם את שתי הבחינות כל אחד בבן אחד, שלא יצאו מעורבים, that they should not come out mixed, intermingled, ואם כן, and therefore, קניתי איש שיהיה עם השם בלי זוהמה. I've acquired for humanity a man, a human being that will be connected to Yud-Kei Vav-Kei without any toxicity. Who Hevel, this is Hevel, Shahaya Adayim Bevitna, who was still in her womb, who had not come out yet. Vihi hodata la Hashem, she's thanking Hashem now. Meaning, it was only because she could totally recognize the blackness of Cain. I don't know how she let them play together. I mean, okay. But this is her thanking God. And that's why there's no record.
You would have thought there would have been thanks after Hevel. I mean, the thanks came before. It's maybe an elevated form of thanks.
The Al Kain, and therefore, Behevel lo amra davar. She did not say a thing. The Torah does not record anything regarding Hevel, meaning on the heels of his birth. Ki alav dibra kvar, because she was already talking about him. That statement was about him. Ukemoshe amru chachmei ha'emet. And like the Mekubalim tell us, Ki Kain hu Yitro. Yitro is ultimately the tikkun for Cain, vehevel hu Moshe, and Hevel is Moshe Rabbeinu shetiken et Cain, who actually fixed Cain. So
Hevel fixed Cain?
No, it means over here that Moshe fixed Yitro, which means he fixed Cain.
Oh yeah.
Moshe, who is Hevel, fixed Cain in the end by Moshe fixing Yitro. Okay.
How did he fix Cain? How did Moshe fix Cain?
Because he fixed it. Well, okay. So the pasuk says, "Vayishma Yitro," and Yitro heard.
Yeah.
Okay? He came to the Jewish people. So, what's the big deal? What's he coming for? Did he stay there? What does it mean he came? What's the big deal? He brings Tzipora with him. He's not coming to reunite them as an angry father-in-law and saying, "You left Tzipora here." I mean, Tzipora has been in Midian since the whole Yetziat Mitzrayim, right? He's saying, "No, we actually, despite all the drama and whatever you did and whatever ta'anot I have, this is real, this is big, and I want to be a part of it."
Actually, now I remember what the Alshech said. He said that the whole reason that Cain killed Hevel was that he was jealous that Hevel had two sisters and he had one. And so the fixing of that was when Yitro brought his daughter to Moshe.
Why? Why was it a fixing?
Because he understood that there was no reason to be jealous. He was giving back the daughter, he was giving back the sister that he was jealous of.
But so that means that there was a nisayon on the story of Yitro. What was the nisayon of Yitro that was hard for him, that he was able to do that? That was a rectification of that.
He left his world to bring back its support to Moshe.
But what meaning Cain has to experience he has to be atoning for that jealousy that he had before. So meaning Yitro has to get over something. Meaning he has to, even on the level of Yitro, there has to be some sort of drama, some sort of nisayon. Right? And that is, meaning you could say, meaning anybody else would be like, there's no way. You don't need him. We're not going back to him. He doesn't know how to take care of you. He doesn't know, even if he's a wonderful person and he's an amazing prophet, right? But he didn't allow those resentments to hold him back. Okay? So now, but the point is really that all that is happening in the context of his conversion. Because he had no reason to take Moshe's call seriously. And now it says all of a sudden he's come around. He recognizes God, right? It's the Parsha of Matan Torah. We call it Yisro because he's coming to be connected to God. And he's so excited because he's a man who's always been described as Kohen Midyan. He's a priest. Why? Because he woke up in the morning and he said, "I don't know who I got to serve, but I know the highest form, the highest thing a man could aspire to is to serve God. And I'm going to find who to serve. He was a Kohen. He didn't know who. And finally, he's thrilled because now he recognized the true God. So the pasuk says that he heard. What did he hear that he recognized that it was the true God? Vayishma Yisrael. So Rashi brings the Midrash. He says, Ma shmua sham'a. What did he hear? What was the rumor that he heard? Uba. It said Kriyat Yamsuf and Mechiyat Amalek. Those two things convinced him to come. So somehow, those two things, Moshe had such a hand in it that we're going to say now that because of Moshe's standing and what he was able to be a channel for in the world, that Hashem was able to do these great things through Moshe, that was what was able to make an impression on Yitro and bring him back to good. And somehow that is some sort of tikkun for Kai. I mean, I'm not fleshing it out, but I'm saying deeper what's happening, what we're doing. So, but that's the saga of Moshe and Yitro, and which we're plugging in here, and we're saying somehow that was okay. Okay, so Vehevahu Moshe Shetiken Kain. Yomar, so the verse means the following. Nichamti, I have been consoled, mitumat Kain, from the impurity of Kain. Kihine kaniti, I have acquired, ayedei teshuvati, through my repentance, tikkun, a rectification. Halohu, which is, ish shehu im Hashem, a man that goes with God, which is Heva, which is really, vehu ha'ish Moshe, that is the man Moses. She taknehu, that will fix him, meaning Kain. V'hakinyan, this acquisition, yiya ayedei teshuva kivakodam, will be through repentance like before. Ubama sheyitro nikra ish. How do we know that Yitro is called an ish?
He's referred to as ish.
Shene'emar, for the verse says, Vayoel Moshe lashevet et ha'ish. Here, Yitro is referred to specifically as the ish. So the ish, which is Hevel, is metaken Kayin, who becomes an ish, who is referred to as Yitro, as ish. Okay. Yomar, so that verse is saying, Nichamti, I've been consoled, Ki kaniti ish, I have acquired a man, Shehu im Hashem, which goes with God, Hu Yitro, that is Yitro, She Yidbak el Hashem, he will cleave to God, V'hu Zeh ben, and that's this son, Ki et kemo im, because the word et sometimes means with.
So really, she's saying that Ha'ish is
it comes back to Kain in the end. Yeah, it's a double, and that's what I love about the Alshech HaKadosh's drash, that it's a level of language, of play beyond language, that he explains something, and then you could see how the language has multiple meanings, and simultaneously, that's what it intended.
Yes.
Okay, so that's we'll have to wait for our next installment.
Yeah, perfect.
Okay.
Good. Thank you. Oh, there's some questions. Fascinating explanation. Let's create Okay.
All right.
Okay, great.
We have time for some Parasha.
Yeah, we have 15 minutes. 40 minutes.
We have a low battery. Is there a way to plug this in?
Let's just carry on with that.
Okay.
I can change it onto my phone if
well, I think no, the camera's fine. This is okay.
Yeah.
All right. So okay, we're continuing with the Pachad Yitzchak on Purim. We're in the first Ma'amar. In this case, it's called the first Inyan, and we're discussing Reshit Goyim Amalek La'achrito Adei Oved, the pasuk in Ovadia. I'm sorry, the pasuk in Balak. That's the prophecy of Bilam. Okay, so we talked about how we were describing actually very, very interesting Tchunot HaNefesh. We talked about Rabbeinu Yonah's comment on the pasuk in Mishlei about the Ish Lefi Mahalalo, that a person can be recognized based on what he praises, because a person has a faculty that we'll call the koach of hakirat hachashivut. A person is driven to recognize in his mind that which is important, and to afford it primacy, meaning to subjugate oneself to that which he recognizes is important in life. So a person is recognized to based on what he praises, because that is an identification of what he thinks of as important. Okay. We're going to pick up with Dalet. כל הדברים הללו אמורים הם באדם שעצם כוח הכרת החשיבות מוטבע הוא בו כהגון. Okay, so we want to discuss now that we talked about this. A person has a drive to recognize that which is important. Somebody who really, really loves Torah learning, he will afford Talmidei Chachamim great respect, where in contrast, even somebody who spent all his life learning Torah, if he doesn't respect Talmidei Chachamim, but he fawns over the rich and famous, it shows how close he really is to Torah. So now we said, now that's all true, meaning that when given a deeper level, operating the way it should, which we're going to discuss now. Meaning that this is actually what we have identified until now as an overlay of a deeper process that we want to discuss or introduce. Okay, so what we were talking about until now, we'll call the koach hakarat hachashivut, the power of the recognition of importance that a human has. Okay, so now. אלא שהבחינה היא עם כוח זה פועל הוא במקום הרוי ובכיוון הראוי. This aspect, it only works when it is in its proper place and it is focused properly. אבל האמת היא, the truth is, כי במבחן זה, with this level, של איש לפי מהללו, this phenomenon of being able to identify a person, that a person expresses his praise, based on what he recognizes as important, nechleleti she'ela mukdemet l'she'ela hanal. So before we ask, in order to identify a person, we ask, what does he praise? Before we do that, we have to ask a deeper question on the person. Ki aleinu ladat, it is for us to know, shelekoach zeh shel hakarat hachashivut, for this faculty of being able to recognize that which is important, nimtza benefesh hitnagdut gdola. The human soul naturally has a great contraforce to this faculty. Just like a person has the ability or the drive to seek out something important that he must sublimate himself to, that's all given that the contraforce he has also simultaneously a force to reject and to kick back on anything that is foisted upon him as being important. Meaning anything that presents itself to him, to his being, as threatening to overpower him because it is important, that he should subjugate, there's a claim of importance that he should subjugate himself to, as long as that is not in its proper place, he can never get to the point where, or we can't get to the point where we can identify him based on what he affords respect to. Meaning, a person cannot afford respect if their faculty for destroying respect is in check. So we're saying that a person doesn't just have a faculty of identifying what's important, but he also has a need to dispel the importance of things.
Can you give an example of that?
We're going to discuss it in a second. I'm just introducing it. A person has a need to dispel and to fight against the projected importance of something.
It's almost, say, what Gasha said in Noach, that every positive energy has an equivalent and opposite negative energy.
We're going to spec out the full psyche of this. Okay? So nimtza benefesh hitnakdut gedola. In a person's nefesh, they have a tnuah of hitnakdut, a spirit of
rebellion.
Yes, but it's not rebellion, meaning just qua rebellion. It's specifically a threat. Something has a claim of importance instead of my natural tendency would be to sublimate myself. I have to check that first.
Mm.
Meaning, I'm not willing. There is the indomitable human spirit, right? Is the need to be free, and I will not contain myself based on external reality just because of claims of importance.
Mm.
Meaning that could be used for good. Avram Avinu went around striking all the lies that tried to imprison the human psyche, right? However, if this is not in check, if a person is burning down the wrong structures, then he never got to a place of a koach hahilu, a power. Meaning, well, we'll discuss it. Okay, so yesh ba b'nafsho shel adam nitiyah charifa lezilzul. A person in his soul has a strong or a sharp. A nitiyah is not a reflex, but a compulsion, lezilzul, to degrade things. L'umat koach hakarat hacheshivut, in contrast to the faculty of recognizing importance, nimtza hu benefesh mahalach she'eino rotze lisbol shum chashivut. There is a strain, a streak in the person where a person does not want to suffer any sort of importance. Ubeziluta nichale, and it is easier for him, it is more pleasant for him to disdain it and to find how it is not important.
Because you don't want to lower yourself to something else.
Right. Meaning these are all caricatures of things that if they were, meaning they're total or extreme applications of things that if they were b'mizug, if they were in their proper proportion, they allow a man to be straight. They allow balance. Meaning, imagine if a person throws himself to everything. He'll start buying celebrity magazines, right? And worshiping all kinds of silliness, and has degraded his spirit of man. He's imprisoned in something that is so beneath him, which we're going to discuss that contrast on the other side. This is all in an attempt to understand the human psyche so that we can appreciate the impure force of Amalek. I'm just noting that we're taking this, right? We started in the context of understanding Amalek, okay? So Shmo, the name, Shalakoach Hazeh. If we gave a name to this need for a man to disdain the importance in things, Hamid Paretz B'Chazaka, which breaks through with great strength and vitality, lahafkia datzmo, in order to cast off the yoke from himself, miyadeh shel chashivut, from the yoke of importance. What is the name of this? Leitzanut, mockery. Mockery serves that only that's what it's there for. And indeed, in society, right, that's what we reserve mockery for, to take away and to call forth the emptiness of the things that claim importance that we feel are threatening, and we have to show how they're really nothing. They're paper tigers, or else we wouldn't afford them any of our attention. So the posturing as if it's so silly, but really the truth is we feel the need to point out how silly it is, right? Because we're fighting.
Because we're threatened by it.
Exactly. So that's leitzanut. Midat leitzanut hatzmit, the essential quality of mockery, kefishin nitzeh benefesh b'sharsha, how according to the nature of how she is found in her roots in the nefesh, inyana hi limtso et hapratza b'chol binyan shel chashivut al menat listar kol binyan. What's its modus operandi? It identifies in a structure, in a building, where there's a hole or a crack, and it exploits that crack to undermine the entire building. Mitocha shel partzazu, through within this pirza, this gap. So he's been using also the language, there's a lot of descriptive language, which means pritzut, means a breaking of boundaries, a breaking forth, an attack, a cutting through a protective barrier. So it finds a crack in the fence and it exploits it, right? Which is very much meaning, what is the cheapness of the modus operandi of mockery is you find something that does not necessarily tell of the essential rottenness of the thing, but it's just a blemish, and you use that to justify bringing down the whole system. It's an exploitation and an exaggeration, and you're saying that blemish represents the whole thing, and therefore the whole thing is no good. So it's really exploitation. Okay, she'ifato. Okay, zeh leumat zeh. This, in contrast to this, meaning this is the exact opposite of the need that someone has to afford and to build up and to put on a pedestal and to protect, meaning something that's very, very important, is very dear to him and it's precious to him. So And if something's important, then we protect all of it because we want to support the structure. So that exact mirror of that is this koach haletzanut makar. Okay? She'ifato shel koach hahilul, the desire, the yearning, the movement, the direction of this faculty, this power of praising something, being able to praise something. Why are you praising it? To take note and to fortify the fact that it is important in your vision of reality. Hu laharbot chashivut ba'alam. Koach hahilul, the need to praise, is to give importance in the world. Is to bring importance. Ula umato, and in contrast to that, she'ifato shel koach haletzanut, the desire of the power of mockery. Hi laharbot zilzul ba'alam. It is to bring disdain. And is there another synonym, a good word for when you rob something of its importance and leave it bereft and shamed? V'nimtza, and it turns out ki hamivchan hazeh, the test to know shel ish lefi mahalala, to identify a person according to that which he praises, mitpashet hu ben shtei nekudot mesuyamot. That is a reality that extends between two particular points in the person's nefesh. Meaning, a person, according to his praise, is a manifestation of where he is between his ability to recognize importance and his need to disdain things. Where he is in that is his dat, his vision of the world, and therefore that's what will be expressed in the koach hahilul. Hanekudah harishona, what's the first point in this range that expresses itself as what he praises? Matzavo shel ha'adam, the state of the person, b'machloket zo, in this argument or in this fight, sheben koach hahilul ben koach haletzanut. Person lives in the tension between his need, his power to give praise, and his power to disdain. Okay, so he has a force in him that needs to bring down structures of importance, and he has a need to put himself beneath that which is greater than him and praise it. What a person praises is where he finds himself in the tension of these two forces. Hanekuda hashniya, the second point, ki be'imtim tzaloma. If, right, imtim tzaloma is a phrase from Chazal, it's how we learn in the Gemara. If you're assuming, meaning given this, then we could talk about this. Yeah. So imtim tzaloma shal nekuda rishona, meaning if you have already a person who is not struggling in a negative way with his need to disdain things, with his koach zilzul, right? Dahainu im tim tzaloma. If we're able to say